Have you ever felt so screwed over or wronged by your boss that you decided to burn the whole thing down with a single phone call or email? Well, if you've felt this way, this episode is for you. Welcome to We've All Done It. I'm Kimberly Benoit, author, speaker, and strategic partner to leaders and organizations. Here's what this show is all about. We've all had a toxic boss or coworker. But have you ever stopped to ask whether you've been that person to someone else? Here's the thing. Every leader faces challenges and makes mistakes. What matters most is figuring out what's actually wrong, making smart adjustments, and getting back on track quickly. This show is real conversations about the mistakes leaders make, the patterns we fall into without meaning to, and the honest self-awareness it takes to do better. No shame, no judgment, just the truth and what to do with it. Let's go. Welcome back, everybody. I am so excited for our guest today. Today, we are joined by Mr. Jesse Weinstein. He is a partner at Phillips and Associates and has worked for many, many years in an area that I think many of you are going to be quite excited. So he has worked cases related to employees facing harassment and discrimination and retaliation at work. And he has a real passion for working for people who tend to be overlooked. And I'm talking about you, my female leaders, who maybe don't fully understand what your rights are and how you can protect yourself in smart ways. And so I was so excited when he reached out about being on the show because this is a topic we haven't really gotten a ton into, is talking about retaliation and how to show up well and make sure we're asking good questions. So welcome to the show, Jesse.
Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you for being here. Joining us all the way from big New York City. So before we jump into your work specifically in the legal space with workplace retaliation, I want to take a moment to talk through maybe a moment in your career where you were the one who maybe jumped to some conclusions or approach leadership in a way that could have resulted in some very negative consequences that feel like retaliation or some kind of discrimination.
Sure. There's one that comes to mind, and it still kind of haunts me to this day a little bit. If I could, Monday morning quarterback, go back and do it differently, I would. But it was during my time in the Navy. I was enlisted back in 2005 to 2009. That's when I was in. At that time, I was 21, 22 years old. I was on a ship. It was in the middle of a wartime, and I was part of a unit that was navigational intelligence, and we were basically a Google Maps and intelligence unit for our ship. And there was a dispute between my colleagues and I. I felt like I was doing a lion's share of the work on something when it was supposed to be more collaborative. And I felt that my direct supervisor was very chummy and very friendly with the people that were in my group, and that I was being sort of outcasted and the one who was willing to do the work and not getting any air to breathe, for lack of a better phrase. So when I went to talk to my colleague about this situation and he refused to do more work, and then I saw my supervisor was sort of backing him up on that, I went all the way to almost the top of the chain of the command. And I filed a complaint about my colleague and my supervisor. And it was this big dramatic thing. And there's a meeting with the captain of the ship and the executive officer and me and my supervisor and the colleague and my chief. And while I maybe vindicated myself for 2.5 minutes after I sent the email, all of the people in between my direct supervisor and the commanding officer, who I didn't go to because I thought this was a social emergency. My brain, I don't even know, I was 21, was not even fully developed yet. But like I was just so upset about this that I just felt the need that I needed to go all the way to the top. And I really regret the way I handled that situation, because at the end of the day, I burned a lot of relationships. That took me a long time to repair, and I skipped a lot of people who probably could have helped me. And I acted on an impulse and emotion instead of doing what I would do now, 20 years later, taking a breath, taking a beat, and sort of putting everything in front of me and figuring out the best plan of attack.
Well, so first and foremost, the giddier version of me was like, that must have felt really good in the moment, right? Like, so
Yeah.
what were you telling yourself, like, that in the moment that you sent that made it feel like it was okay to go all the way to the top? Because I got to tell you, I'm sure people are listening and they're like, that is ballsy, and that is something probably people have thought of but maybe didn't do. So for you, what helped you feel like that was the right next step?
So unequivocally, I was doing more work than I was supposed to be doing on this project. There was no doubt about it that I was being wronged here by my team. And that also looking back, I wish my supervisor would have handled it a little differently in the moment. Like there was no doubt that I was correct. And I think, and I say that now about what I was upset about. Where I think I fell short was not resolving it at the lowest level possible. I felt entitled to go as high as I could, and something that hasn't changed in me. I've always had like a pretty strong sense of fairness, but I think back then that that driver was in an engine that didn't have as much sort of control as it does today. And I think there was a sense of entitlement there. I think there was a sense of self-righteousness and self-importance. That's how I assess myself. And I know we're our own biggest critics, but I think I just felt like, because I knew that this was wrong, that there was no issue. Like, and I thought that it was the best way to institute change. I thought I took this like paternalistic route where I thought I was, basically parting the oceans, but I wasn't. I was just a 21-year-old low-ranked kid who went literally to one rank lower than an admiral and said, my team is doing less work than I am, and my supervisor won't step in. I'm cringing even thinking about it.
Well, and it's so funny. So like taking it out of military terms, it's like saying like you're an entry-level analyst and you brought it all the way to like the COO of the company.
Mm-hmm.
And we're like, yo, which is not, I have personally not done that, but I have seen that done in others. So, so you mentioned that if you thought you were right for about 2.5 minutes. So when did you realize it was a problem? Like, when did it occur to you that, hey, I've really screwed up here?
2 minutes after I sent the email, I was like, oof, was that the right decision? I got that feeling in my stomach, like, did I just stick my proverbial foot in my mouth? Like, did I, my head started sort of going to that anxious place. I knew it pretty quickly because the response I got was from the secretary to the commanding officer. And it was just a 1-sentence question. Did you discuss this with your team leader? And then I immediately was, refreshed with a memory from boot camp where they just pounded into our heads, chain of command, chain of command, chain of command. And where I basically diverged from that and said, Jesse's right, take it to the top, so that's really where I was at the time.
Well, and so you said that it caused damage. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So talk to me a little bit about, because that moment felt good. You thought you were doing the right thing, but what did it cost you in that moment?
Well, I think that it had a damaging impact on a few levels, right? On a horizontal level, my colleagues, my friends, the guys and gals that we would all hang out off the ship, I think started to look at me in the workplace and walk on eggshells. Like, oh, this, like, I might sneeze the wrong way and this guy's going to write the president, and it's a really, really tough spot to be in when you go from being liked and being friends with everybody to now being the person that everybody's sort of afraid to work with because you look like a pariah, and then of course, like looking more vertically, that was where there was more damage. My team leader just basically wrote me off as dead because I said something to him in the moment when I realized one thing was happening when it wasn't supposed to happen, but I didn't have a meaningful conversation with him where I gave him an opportunity to understand everything that was happening, how long it was happening, what was being done that wasn't supposed to be done. I just sort of like had a 15-second conversation with him in public space in front of the people, which is another mistake, a subsidiary mistake, like doing it, like basically telling on my colleagues right in front of them. Because I was just so angry about it. And so I blew my trust with him, and he was somebody who was evaluating me and I had a great relationship with prior to this project. I just had my tunnel vision about being correct. And and then above him, my chief, after you go to team leader, you have your chief, and then you have like the department heads and all the way up. Whereas, people would smile at me and be comfortable. I think I just felt, and this might have just been me writing the narrative in my head. I just felt like everybody was looking at me like I could be a ticking time bomb that could create drama at any second. And it really damaged my reputation. And luckily I was a hard worker and I ended up still getting good evaluations. And it wasn't until 2 years later when my enlistment ended, that I made amends with my team leader and my colleagues, and left on a positive note. And we're friendly actually to this day on social media. We stay in touch every once in a while, but it made the rest of my enlistment on the ship pretty miserable, to be honest, because I wasn't trusted with more complicated projects either.
Yeah.
That's the other part of it, not just relationships. It's like, okay, we know he's capable of doing the work, but like, is it going to come with baggage? I found myself stuck in like medium purgatory in terms of like, assignment level and just sort of isolated from everybody.
So this is such an amazing example, right? Of, I think every single one of us at some point in our career, or I would even say outside of professional, I feel like we probably started feeling this way when we were in school and had to do school projects. And there was always one person who was pulling their weight more. And whether your kid, I'm talking about, like in high school, starts there and it progresses through. So I think that we've all probably been in that place where we felt very justified in being really angry and probably saying and doing things we now older, wiser ourselves would not do. But I would love to hear about how that experience has informed or been a motivator in the work you currently do now related to cases where there are legitimate retaliation, discrimination, things that are not going on. So can you talk a little bit about how that moment maybe played a role in what you're doing today?
It had a profound impact, because it's a reminder to me that you have to think rationally to the extent that you can. And it's informed the way that I lead people. It's informed the way that I work with people. It's informed the way that I talk to people. It's informed the way that I sort of respond to things that stimulate my brain. It really has probably had the biggest impact on me professionally than any other factor. And I can go through phases with that. After the military, I did college and then law school. And so, I was like, I'm going to a new state and going to New York City. I'm not in San Diego anymore. I'm away from the Navy. I can grow my hair out a little bit and wear normal clothes. I can redefine myself, rebrand myself, and be born again. I'm going to be a little more subdued. And, I was in a social science atmosphere. So healthy debate was encouraged in college and then in law school. But I would say really when I started after law school at the DA's office is when I was like, okay, think about what happened when you were in the Navy and what are you going to do differently now? And it's resolving things at the lowest level possible is an attitude I went into the DA's office with, my first job out of law school. I was not going to be the person who skipped people unjustly. As an employment lawyer who represents employees who are wrong, I'm going to put an asterisk on that and say there are times you should go to the top. And good leaders who are at the top should have open door policies. Like there's a balance. But I think it's taught me you have to be a shapeshifter. You can't fit the same peg in the same hole every single time. Yeah. There's multiple truths can exist. There can be some scenarios where you shouldn't skip your direct report. And then there are some scenarios where you should. There are some scenarios where you don't even have to get a supervisor involved and you can just take it up horizontally. So that's really been how it's informed my experience. I think culturally, for my team, I have 11 people under me. I try to create an atmosphere where I'm in the trenches with everybody doing the work. So I know what's going on in my cases, but I also welcome them to come in and talk to me and pitch advice. But I do say if you can resolve things together, it'll make you both better. You'll work better together. you'll do better work.
If you already know exactly what you're wrestling with and just need focused time to work through it with someone you trust, well, a focus session just might be the fastest path forward. Details for setting up a session with me are in the show notes or go to KimberlyJBenoit.com. Until next time, remember, we've all done it.
So one of the things that I think is interesting when we have feel wronged is sometimes I think what we're looking for, or you want someone to validate that feeling for you, right? So right or wrong, you want that feeling of that. So do you, in how you have seen everything that's played out with you, because I mean, granted, you're seeing a lot of you've seen more cases than us. Like I have my N of one experiences and things that I've seen throughout my career. But for you, for people who are out there who feel like they're in this position right now, they feel wronged, they feel like they're being taken advantage of, they feel like they're maybe not being valued correctly. What advice would you give them, or what would you want them to think about with your experience?
I would say that to the best of your ability, focus on yourself. Focus on what's in your control, and don't speculate on what's not in your control. Give people the benefit of the doubt. You know, you want to look at people not with cynicism that you work with and work. We're just talking about workplace.
Yeah.
If you're on the same team, vertically, horizontally, you give people the benefit of the doubt up front until you can't. And I think if you look at everybody you work with and for with that lens, it opens up the ground for more productive conversations. People who are looking for validation, that's all of us. That's all of us human beings, right? And for me, it roots back, I think, to when I was a small kid. And some part of me probably felt a little invisible and a little chip on my shoulder, you know, when I was a young kid. And that sort of has carried me through my whole entire life. It feels good to be vindicated and to be validated, but try to find, you know, some sort of fulfillment in what you're doing and not necessarily involving other people in that.
So I'm hearing you say slow down. I'm hearing you say assume good intent. At what point though, because your example is a good one, right? Like you had good intent, but you took an action that actually wasn't the right one in that moment. Like there was really, like there's another way it could have been handled that could have gotten a better outcome. Even if you were taking on greater parts of the responsibility, there's probably a different way you could have resolved that problem.
Right.
For people who are sitting here and are feeling like your 21-year-old self,
right,
and are ready to like press that send button and like to the CEO and just scorch earth. At what point do you say, okay, slow down, focus on yourself, focus on what you can control, versus you need to take an action is maybe beyond just focusing on yourself? What is that tipping point for people of like, you know, when is that next conversation? When do they reach out to say somebody like you? Like when is it the right moment to escalate beyond those initial like calm down, make sure you're clear-headed, but hey, I'm still clear-headed, but there's still something that's not right. So what would you say are the trigger points for like reasonable escalation?
I think you have to ask yourself one very simple question. As soon as you get that feeling, that pit in your stomach, I'm going to light the bar on fire. Before you do, you have to ask yourself, do I want to be correct or do I want to be practical? Because they're not always the same exact thing. If you want to be correct, you'll be correct all the way into a pile of dust. If you want to be practical, there may or may not be a way to achieve what you're looking to achieve without pushing that red nuclear button. But it always starts with that question. What's the balance between being correct and being practical? If it's really important to be correct, and that's your goal, I highly doubt that is something that, you know, sort of culminates in a good workplace culture. It's not often about being correct because we work with tons of people and we have to concede some ideas and we have to compromise some of what we want. So I always start out with that question. Am I, is this my ego, or am I actually focused on what I'm trying to get done?
That's a good one. And then the practical route, I'm assuming, is what are the conversations you need to have? What are the actions you should take that aren't pressing that send button to the CEO, that actually are going to get you closer to a resolution that may be realistic?
Yeah, I can give a perfect example. I can give a real life work example of this practical, because I say it to everybody that is at my firm, that, I supervise or I mentor. And I say it to opposing counsels all the time too. And I'm arguing over stuff. And I say it to clients. It can apply everywhere in my job. But one specific example, I had a paralegal on my team once, a couple of years ago. And our firm we moved to a new floor, and our firm put all the paralegals in this area, nice area with like big cubicles up against these huge windows. And my paralegal at the time had been there the longest out of all the paralegals, but it was first come, first serve. He was on vacation, and the two window seats that, were very much pursued were taken very quickly. And he ended up getting the aisle seat, which, by the way, is not bad. My first job after the DA's office, I was working in like a sterile office with 4 other attorneys. And when I was in the Navy, I slept on a bookshelf, basically. But again, he was correct that window.
I just have to tell you, my first professional job, my office was a former supply closet. They had, I watched them move the supplies out of the closet and cram a baby desk in. So I understand what you're saying right there. Please continue.
Yeah. So look, I understood why he was frustrated. I understood that because, he'd been there longer than everybody else. And here's this paralegal who just graduated college and had only been there for a year or two, and he'd been at the firm 4 or 5 years already, and he's got the worst seat in the house because he was on PTO. In theory, he's correct, I think, and justified in feeling upset. And I said that to him. I don't want to diminish your feelings, but we also talked about getting him a bonus at the end of the year and getting him a pay raise. And I said, look, you want me to go to the mat, to the brass and try and get them to make this person switch cubicles with you? I can do that. But is this where you want to use your firepower? Is this how you want to use your firepower? Is this more important than getting a pay raise and a bigger bonus? Because from where I'm standing, you might be correct, but practically speaking, if you're here to make money, which we don't work for fun, most of us, I love my job, but it keeps the lights on. I don't do it because I'm like a billionaire who's just bored. I need to. And so at the end of the day, we talked through it. He ended up just sucking it up. He got the big bonus. He got the pay raise at the end of the year. And ironically, our one of the managing partners was like, that was really big of him to just like set the example and do the work, despite where he got the desk. And he never even knew about the dispute. So I think that was a perfect example of somebody who was about to go crazy and wanted me to go all the way up the flagpole to get him a different cubicle, but pump the brakes, drop the temperature a few degrees, and ended up making the more practical decision.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's a good example though of how very quickly something that the phrase that I think of is, this the hell you want to die on, right? Right. There's going to be inequities and that maybe don't hit a legal standard, but will hit what I call like a cultural standard or an engagement hit that over time that can build up to feel like it is personal, it is and it is ugly. And I think that sometimes can cloud people's judgment on, is this a hill worth dying on or not?
Yeah, absolutely. And I honestly, I think that there's something to be said about the weight of words is not nearly as heavy as the weight of actions, right? And with correct versus practical, usually the actions are the more practical decision, right? Going back to the aircraft carrier, I'm like, practically speaking, if the goal here was to reduce my workload and to make it more even keeled, I should have just had a more productive conversation with the two people that were in my group and said, hey, I really don't appreciate it that I'm here when I'm supposed to be sleeping in my rack or working out, doing the work that you guys didn't do. Can we just like recalibrate and divvy it up so that I actually can get some time off too. I feel like if I had just done that, but instead I compartmentalized it. I let it devour me from the inside out, and then I exploded. Um, and I really, I don't regret that it happened, because without that happening, I don't think that I would actually even be sitting here on this podcast today, to be honest. Like the weight of that incident has tattooed my psyche, for the next 20 something years. So I'm glad that it happened, because it taught me something about imperfection and sort of learning from it. I think that's the other sort of branch from this, is like, you want to go for the ballpark and not the bullseye. Like, there are jobs. If you're a brain surgeon, you can't just almost get it right. I obviously understand that, but I think we put a lot of pressure on ourselves, and I think that also can lead to emotional, not practical decisions. But it's okay to screw up. That's the stuff that success is made of. I lost trials, which made me better to win trials that I won big on. You have to go backwards before you go forwards.
So, because I want to make sure that we're leaving people with some clear thoughts, right? So, because what I feel like we're talking about is like, could be 80% of an average workday.
Yeah.
And especially I feel like right now in the culture that we have, like, I feel like it's even more, there's lots of layoffs happening. So people are being asked to do more with less. And so there's a lot of engagement struggle, cultural struggle, where I think that emotional elevation is there, right? So people might feel closer to that tipping point. But at what point does someone need to reach out to someone like you? At what point does it go from being like, hey, emotionally check yourself, make sure you're showing up the best way possible before you go crazy, to, hey, maybe there's a pattern here that's bigger and does require some outside eyes for perspective?
When you can clearly see that you're in a zero-sum situation. And that's part of the setback, right? Is what you can't drive until you defog the windows, right? You have to give yourself some space to actually get the lay of the land. And there may be that may actually result in you having to go to the CO, right? Or the C or to the top of the flagpole. There's not a bright line rule about you can't never do this or you can't do that. It's always gray. But I think when you stop and you can see things clearly, and still you feel like it's not attainable to resolve at a low level, in the context of what I do, if your direct supervisor sexually harassing you, it might be a futile and risky decision to go to him and say, I feel like I'm being sexually harassed in the workplace. I think that's good when people do that. I think they should complain and reject advances and document that if you're listening, right? Yeah. Do it in writing. But, that's a situation where if you don't feel comfortable going to the person who's harassing you, then you have to go above them. All I'm asking is, if you're listening, is just stop and take a beat to the extent it's practical before you do that. At least give yourself the luxury of seeing and hearing everything around you first.
Yeah, I was thinking about that particularly with retaliation, because sometimes, having been an individual contributor and also having been in leadership, I can sometimes see things happen in a company where the decision was made for very good reasons. But to the people it's being inflicted on, I know they feel like it's retaliation for something. Mm-hmm. Or they think the motive is something nefarious. When the truth of it is, it's just unfortunate circumstance. The business has to make this decision strategically, financially, has to make some changes. And it feels very punitive, right?
Yep.
And so I think that I appreciate that guidance of like, hey, just because it feels that way doesn't mean it is that way. So how do you take the emotion out of it a little bit? And then, to your point, start just documenting, start collecting things to see if the trend is a real trend versus something you just feel. Would that be a fair?
Yeah, I think that, and if you still, yeah, I think so. And if you feel like there's something not sitting right with you, call a lawyer. Right? You don't have to wait until, in the employment context, you don't have to wait until you get fired to call me. Very often.
I hope not.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, but like you'd be surprised that this misconception that we only jump in to do repair,
Yeah.
right? And like I negotiate people out all the time. I get involved while people are still working there. It's usually and usually they're executives, high level, big companies, and I get the call after they've done that process of saying I'm at the point of no return. This is scorched earth. I need to get a lawyer involved now. I need to get out of this because there's no practical way for me to continue under these
Yeah.
circumstances. And I do understand exactly what you're saying with this sort of disconnect between company policy and the impact it has on people, which is why I find that many of my clients, many, probably a vast majority of them work for Fortune 500 companies. And it's usually the smaller businesses that have a tighter handle on sort of communications and sort of making sure everything is, what's the phrase, cum sa, for lack of a better phrase, right? Because the CEO is not 10,000 people removed
Yeah.
from the newest, lowest ranking person at the company. There may be 22 people in a company and the CEO is handing out flyers just like you are, I mean, that's an example. So like, I find that in those situations, we find less problems with policy changes and the impacts because, there's more of a team dynamic. But when you're dealing with so many layers in a company that has 10, 15,000 people, and the people making the decisions are lateral people who have never done the grunt work that the people on the bottom of the company are doing, but they're creating policies that impact them, there's always discord there.
It's like I said, it's so fun because it's not fun and amusement park way, or maybe more of like a roller coaster. But because I've seen things like I've seen where it's been misunderstood, but I've also seen where there are patterns that are very, you find yourself cocking your head to the side and saying, that's an interesting like hiring pattern. Like when you see someone who hires the same person, like the same kind of person over and over again that looks miraculously just like them, or like the promotions don't seem to go so again, like it's interesting because I've seen kind of both ends of it. And so I appreciate your perspective on it. So I want to ask very quickly. So if there's someone who is sitting out there who's listening to this, who feels like they really do want to push the button, they feel very justified. What's one thing you would recommend for them to do this week after hearing this content?
Call me. Honestly, I should probably be there to push the red button for you. Honestly, like if you feel like and I'm talking about the employment context, if you feel like you have to push that red button, you should probably get a lawyer to do it because the collateral damage of doing it on your own without support and the sort of strength of the message won't be nearly the same as a hard-hitting litigator makes an appearance on your behalf. It pushes the red button for you and says, "Hey, I represent John Doe, multiple claims. Let me know if I can talk to your general counsel or your outside counsel." At that point, I'm removing my client from the direct conflict, and now they have to deal with me. And I'm 100 feet in the air looking down. I don't have skin, personal skin in the game. So call me. That's what I would do.
I think that's. I actually, and there's not because, I'm trying to push business at but what I love about that though, is again, what you said is now it's not their conversation to have. Like there's an advocate in the room who's now in the mix. Right. And obviously if they're calling you and you're helping push the button, there's collateral information that is demonstrating that there's something problematic probably happening that doesn't make sense beyond like emotional triggering sometimes.
Yeah. I mean, like, where there's smoke, there's fire. You don't have to wait for the fire, right? Even if you're being told to sign a new employment agreement and you don't feel right about it, but you don't want to quit, that's a good time to call a lawyer and say, "Hey, can you take a look at me? I do contract work. I'm not trying to self-promote entirely, a little bit maybe, but don't be afraid to reach out to the people who can actually help you. You don't have to navigate these paths on your own. There's plenty of firms that do exactly what I do. And for as many firms as there are in the country that do employment work like this, there's too much work and not enough lawyers that do it.
I don't know if that's a good thing, Jesse.
Yeah, I don't think, I mean, if I can
That's
just
a good trend.
I think I can explain the trend in a short sentence if that's okay. Like,
Go for it.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of I talked about representing executives, but a large swath of my cases are in the entertainment industry, and in the media, and doing sexual assault cases or whistleblowing cases against the studios or very famous actors or high profile or high power people in the industry. And everybody thinks that the entertainment industry is sort of on its own island, and that's just how it functions. But I think it's the same in every single industry. As an employment lawyer, I've represented fast food workers, I've represented actors. Like, the common denominator is that there are people on the top, and the companies often are trying to preserve relationships and preserve and protect people who bring money to the company. And there is a zero-sum game of, going against them if it jeopardizes those two things. That's not just in Hollywood. That's just the version that we all get to see, online. But that happens across cross-border every single industry. If they're an entity that has some sort of goal, that's what the company's there to do, to protect the interests and to protect the people who are going to reach that goal. And that's the trend, I think, that makes too much work and not enough lawyers, unfortunately.
Yeah. No, I think that's always a nice reminder for people. And
Mm-hmm.
because we didn't really talk about HR in this process, because a lot of companies, the path would be HR. There's like, there's a path, there's like a technical path. And although I think HR is definitely there for human resources, their goal is, and their purpose is to protect the company.
Yep.
And so I like that. And look, I like leaving it on an action. If you're feeling something, you don't have to suffer in this alone. There are people. So if people are interested in you and want to know more about you, where's the one place they should definitely go to check you?
So Phillips and Associates is the firm I work at. I am the only Jesse at the firm. If you Google my name, Jesse Weinstein, my profile will pop up.
And the link will be in there. I just feel like I like to tell people so that they know to go look in the bio, like look in the show notes, because it'll be in there. But that's the best place. That's the first and best place to go.
Yeah, that's the best place to find me. Give me a call. I try to make myself accessible as much as I can. And I have a whole team of people to help me too. So that's the best way.
Jesse, I just want to say thank you so much for being on the show, talking about an experience that, if we haven't done it, we've dreamed of doing it. But more importantly, like I really respect how you allowed something that wasn't great to really allow it to manifest into something incredibly powerful, and the work that you're doing for people, because it's not small work. And I know that's grinding work. So thank you. Just thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your information.
Thank you so much for having me.
This week, I want to mention something I recently released, a free organizational health scorecard for business owners just like you. It's 16 questions, takes about 5 minutes, and it tells you exactly where your organizational gaps are across 4 areas: strategy, operations, leadership alignment, and growth readiness. A lot of my clients wish they had had something like this before we started working together. It would have helped pinpoint problems so much faster. It's completely free at KimberlyJBenoit.com/scorecard. The link is in the show note. Take it this week and let me know what your score tells you.